Okay, let's dive in. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating and often challenging world of J. Krishnamurti.
Yeah,
We've gathered a stack of sources here, his writings, transcripts from talks, to really, dig into what he was pointing at.
that's right. And these sources, they give us a real window into his background, his unique perspective on, well, everything really,
Hmm.
from organized religion and how he sort of contrasted his views with traditional paths, like, say, some forms of Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
to his core insights on the human mind, thought, desire, pleasure, pain, and ultimately what he meant by understanding oneself.
So our mission with this deep dive really is to comb through these sources and pull out the most impactful nuggets for you. What's so striking about Krishnamurti right from the start is that he wasn't their typical teacher, was he?
Not at all.
He was actually groomed by the Theosophical Society to be this world teacher, but then famously, dramatically, just rejected all authority.
Yeah, completely. He insisted that truth couldn't be found through anyone else, only by each individual looking for themselves.
And that rejection of authority is, well, it's absolutely central to understanding his ideas, isn't it?
Totally. He wasn't offering a new philosophy or like a system to follow. It was more like an urging, a push towards direct, unmediated investigation into your own experience.
Guided only by your own observation.
Exactly. Not by his words as some kind of dogma.
Which brings us right into his perspective on, let's call it the human predicament, starting with the mind itself. We see in the sources how he often links our state to our very biology.
Right, the nervous system.
Specifically, yeah, the advanced human nervous system, which we depend on so heavily for memory and, abstract thinking.
Yes, and what's so striking is how, according to these texts, the products of that nervous system are thoughts, ideas, concepts, beliefs. They've just grown incredibly dominant over time. It's like they've taken on a life of their own, sometimes becoming almost independent of, say, external physical reality.
It's that we built this incredible internal world of thought, and then,
Right.
well, then it started to overshadow or even replace the actual world we live in.
Yeah.
The sources suggest these beliefs became substitutes for reality, almost offering a kind of psychological escape.
An escape from the harsh struggle for survival, as
Right.
one source puts it, and the suffering that's just part of being alive.
Right.
Exactly. And this led to a pretty surprising outcome, as the sources point out.
Mm.
Humans started using this incredibly advanced nervous system, not just for, practical survival stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but primarily for sustaining these abstract beliefs,
Hmm.
often beliefs that had, well, no real basis in actual reality.
And we became incredibly attached to these thought creations.
Deeply attached.
The sources describe how we came to treat them as possessions, my ideas, my beliefs, my identity,
All right.
to the point where people would fight and even die for them. It's quite something.
It really is. Unlike other animals fighting for, actual food or territory, humans would get into deadly conflicts over abstract concepts. Things like my ideal, my God, my country.
Things that, as one source says, never appear walking down the streets in broad daylight.
Exactly. That attachment to thought and belief seems to be at the root of so much conflict, internal and external.
Mm-hmm.
And it highlights a point Krishnamurti often came back to, which echoes that really ancient advice, know thyself.
Right. But the sources note that this vital advice has been, well, almost totally ignored.
Or maybe worse, interpreted as just another belief system to adopt.
Another set of ideas to possess.
Precisely. Rather than a radical call for direct inward understanding of the actual contents and workings of our own minds, this tyranny of our petty beliefs, as he put it.
It really underscores the depth of the challenge he was presenting. Speaking of his journey, let's touch briefly on his background, because it's quite a setup that he ultimately, dismantled.
It really is. Born in Enya, Brahmin family, then discovered as a young boy by Charles Leadbeater of the Theosophical Society, educated in England.
And the Theosophical Society, with leaders like Leadbeater and Annie Besant, they were explicitly looking for a world teacher.
That was their whole project, yeah. They identified Krishnamurti as that figure and set up the Order of the Star of the East for him to lead.
And it's clarified in one source this wasn't meant to be political or religious in the usual sense.
Right, more universal, supposedly.
Yeah.
Not tied to existing structures.
Quite a destiny laid out for him. But then things took a profound turn. His brother Nitya's death, that was a major blow.
Huge impact, yeah.
And then he had this series of intense experiences in Ojai Valley, under a pepper tree.
Mm-hmm. The sources describe feelings of unity with nature, immense clarity, like touching something vast, infinite.
And it was this, this unfolding understanding that led to his radical decision in 1929.
Yeah, to everyone's astonishment, pretty much. He just disbanded the Order of the Star.
Just like that.
Stated unequivocally that truth is a pathless land. It can't be approached by any religion, any sect, any organization made by man. Each person has to find it for themselves.
And crucially, he denied being a guru.
Absolutely denied it. Pleaded with listeners not to follow him, not to accept his words on faith, but to investigate everything he said within themselves.
That denial of authority is so rare, especially in spiritual contexts. Going through these sources, it actually reminded me a bit of the Buddhist Kalama Sutra.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, where the Buddha similarly advised against blindly accepting traditions or teachers, he urged people to examine things for themselves, see if they lead to welfare or suffering. It feels like a resonant parallel, even if the context is different.
It does resonate, yeah. Both point back to the individual's direct perception.
Mm-hmm.
And Krishnamurti saw his own function not as giving answers, but more like being a mirror.
A mirror.
Yeah, reflecting back an image of your own true nature, which he described as this vast, unlimited emptiness. He'd say the person speaking isn't important, but the seeing that happens in you, that's what matters.
Okay. So moving from that foundation of self-investigation, let's dive into one of the areas he explores with incredible depth.
Yeah.
This intricate connection between fear, pleasure, and suffering.
Ah, yes, the one unitary movement.
He saw them all as connected, not separate states.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. How does this whole movement even begin? According to the sources, he traces the arising of desire back to a very specific process.
Involving our senses and thought.
Right. It starts with seeing something, then making contact with it, having a sensation. Then almost instantly, thought steps in. It makes an image or a memory based on that sensation.
And then desire is born.
Boom. The desire for that experience again, or something like it.
Okay, so desire itself is a reaction. And importantly, he describes that initial arising of desire or wanting as healthy, right? Normal.
Yeah, he's quite direct about it in one source.
Yeah.
Says something like, otherwise I'll be dead if you didn't feel a pull to see a beautiful thing again. It's part of being alive.
But here's the crucial turn. Pain, suffering, anxiety. These arise not from the initial sensation or even that first spark of desire.
No, it comes from the constant pursuit of that desire, or the struggle to repeat the pleasure you got from satisfying it before.
And he really zeroes in on the role of thought in this process, specifically how pleasure is heavily sustained by thought.
Yeah, the tree example is great for this. You see a beautiful tree. That initial delight, it's immediate, it's nonverbal, it just is.
Right.
But then thought comes in, labels it, how extraordinary that was, creates a memory, an image of that delight. And then the desire to repeat that feeling, that memory, is born.
So thought turns the immediate delight into the pursuit of pleasure.
Exactly. Pleasure, in this view, becomes a remembered thing based on the past image or feeling. The actual immediate moment of delight or joy, that's free from memory, free from thought interfering.
But once thought gets involved and demands the repetition of that remembered feeling, the chase begins.
Right. And the sources show that the pursuit of that pleasure or being denied it inevitably leads to conflict and suffering.
Fear of not getting it, fear of losing it.
Jealousy, anger, frustration, violence. All of it stems from that.
And this leads to a very challenging idea he presents, that pleasure and fear aren't opposites.
No, two sides of the same coin. The sources suggest the very pursuit of pleasure is itself another form of fear.
Fear of what? Boredom? Emptiness?
Maybe fear of boredom, fear of emptiness, fear of missing out on that remembered good feeling. It's complex.
So pulling this together, he's really saying that fear, pleasure, pain, grief, sorrow, these aren't distinct things that just happen to us.
No, they're all intimately connected. Part of one continuous movement.
Driven by thought capturing sensation, making memories, and then the mind chasing the repetition of pleasure.
Which inevitably brings conflict and suffering, yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely reframes how we usually think about seeking happiness, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We usually see pleasure as the solution to pain.
Right.
But Krishnamurti, based on these sources, suggests they're inextricably linked by this complex, often unnoticed movement of thought.
Which brings us to another fascinating and maybe one of the most counterintuitive parts of his teaching, his challenge to the idea of gradualism.
Ah, yes. Effort and time.
When it comes to seeking profound change or, enlightenment.
Yeah, according to these sources, Krishnamurti stated quite strongly that fundamental psychological change, a deep insight, and awakening it doesn't happen gradually over time.
Not bit by bit.
No, he described it as instantaneous, a sudden awakening, like a major discontinuity in consciousness.
That's a pretty sharp contrast to the common idea, which the sources mention is often attributed to most Buddhists, for example.
Right, the idea that enlightenment takes years, maybe lifetimes, of painstaking meditative practice and countless rituals.
And Krishnamurti was pretty critical of that approach.
Very critical. He saw the whole idea of urging people to work hard over a long period towards enlightenment as an ego package.
An ego package.
Yeah, this whole ego-related process, the striving, the effort aimed at a future goal, it actually creates its own delay by setting enlightenment up as this distant destination.
You ensure you never actually get there in the present.
Exactly. The process itself guarantees it's always in the future.
It's tied into psychological time, isn't it? Time is the perception of moving from what is to what should be.
Right, of increase or decrease progress. Acknowledging or accepting that time is needed to reach enlightenment immediately sends the whole search off on a hopeless tangent, as one source puts it.
The ego, which is built on accumulation and time and effort, has to basically surrender its jurisdiction.
Yeah, step aside completely. He went even further, stating that any process of thought is unsacred.
Any thought, even thinking about spiritual paths or doctrines.
Even thoughts about the Buddha or Dharma. The sources say the only thing that remains sacred is that which thought is utterly incapable of capturing the unknowable.
Because thoughts are just products of the nervous system.
Exactly. They can't grasp or contain the infinite.
That really challenges the foundation of many practices that rely heavily on specific thoughts, devotions, mantras.
Or sacred images, yeah. One source contrasts this with some Buddhist practices encouraging meditation on sacred images or defined paths. Krishnamurti viewed this apparently as filling the mind's essential emptiness.
The emptiness described in texts like the Heart Sutra.
Filling it with more products of the nervous system. Even if those products have an authorized stamp of approval, it's still filling the space, not embracing it.
But it's fascinating. He wasn't advocating for just doing nothing, right?
Not at all. He was advocating for a completely different kind of action. One that doesn't come from effortful striving towards a goal in time.
And that leads us directly to his alternative to trying to control or suppress desire, pleasure, thought.
Which is intense awareness, observation, attention.
He put enormous emphasis on observation, and he made a crucial distinction between observing and analyzing.
Yes. Analysis, as he described it, involves an analyzer, the me, who is separate from the analyzed, the problem I'm trying to fix.
Okay, so there's a division.
A gap, yeah.
Yeah.
And it inherently involves time as the analyzer tries to work on the analyzed. But observation is different. It's seeing what actually is without this division. The observer is the observed, in a sense.
And for this observation to be true, he insisted it had to be without any motive.
Crucial point. If you're observing your anxiety in order to get rid of it, the sources suggest that very motive distorts what you see.
Because you're already judging it, wanting it gone.
Exactly. You're not seeing the anxiety clearly. You're seeing it through the lens of your desire for it to stop.
Krishnamurti personally said it's in the sources that he never controlled himself. He only watched.
Yeah, and he clarified this watching wasn't passive. It was its own discipline, its own action.
Not conforming or suppressing.
No, but it had a sense of correctness, excellence, because it was just seeing things exactly as they are.
He used that simple analogy, didn't he? The poisonous bottle.
Right. If you see a poisonous bottle on the shelves, you don't have to exert willpower or control your desire to drink it. You just see clearly what it is.
And that understanding eliminates the need to even consider touching it. No struggle.
Right. It implies that deep understanding, seeing clearly without distortion, dissolves the issue itself. No need for forceful control.
He also talked about registering only what's absolutely precisely necessary for daily life.
Like learning a language, driving, knowing where you live.
But not registering psychological hurts or insults. Not accumulating them as part of the me.
Which, the sources suggest, requires what he called extraordinary awareness.
And this awareness isn't fragmented, like picking and choosing what you like or dislike about yourself.
No, he spoke of a complete awareness where there's no such choice. Just pure seeing.
It really challenges our default mode, doesn't it? Trying to fix ourselves with techniques or ideas we've learned.
Totally. Approaching something living, like pleasure or pain, with a mind that already has a trick or holds a conclusion from the past.
Just like approaching it with a dead mind, as the sources put it.
Yeah. True understanding needs an active, vital mind, not dulled by habit or fear.
And this brings us back to that fundamental, maybe kind of dizzying question he poses.
Mm,
If we've already learned everything about ourselves in the sense that our mind just pursues pleasure and avoids pain,
mm,
and if learning in order to get pleasure or avoid pain isn't really true learning,
mm.
then what is there left to learn? And maybe even more fundamentally, who exactly is this observer we think is doing the observing anyway?
That question just cuts right to the core of the inward investigation he was pointing towards. It's not about getting more information about the self,
No.
but questioning the fundamental structure of the mind, doing the perceiving, the judging, the desiring.
Moving to beauty and love, which he also explores in these sources, he connects them quite directly, just states, beauty is love.
Simply put, yeah. He explained that truly seeing beauty requires immense sensitivity,
And that sensitivity naturally expresses itself in how you behave, how you treat others.
which leads to compassion.
Yeah.
And he links compassion explicitly to intelligence and right action, not as separate things to cultivate, but as inherent aspects of that sensitive state.
And he sharply contrasted this state of beauty and love with things like greed, envy, anxiety.
Or the constant pursuit of pleasure we just talked about.
Right. He'd often ask, can beauty truly exist when the mind is filled with all that stuff?
And he was very clear about what love is not. The sources explicitly state, love is not desire, not pleasure, not attachment, not jealousy, not ambition, not fulfillment.
He specifically says the fulfillment of desire, which is pleasure, is not love.
Very pointedly, yeah. He used a powerful metaphor for the state of our consciousness in relation to this.
It's a space metaphor.
Right. A mind filled with all the things that thought has put together, beliefs, comparisons, opinions, hurts, anxieties, knowledge used for security. It has no space.
No room.
No room. And just as a tree is beautiful because it has space around it and within its structure, he said we need vast space in our consciousness for beauty and love to exist.
He observed that we often live in a little hole of consciousness.
Yeah, a constricted space created by accumulating thought and the resistance built from hurt and pain.
And we mistakenly call that constricted state love.
Right. He also touched on being free from measure or comparison.
Constantly comparing yourself to others, clever, kinder, nobler.
Or even comparing yourself to an ideal. This measurement, this comparison, leads to envy, judgment, and it prevents the mind from being free, from having that necessary space for love and beauty.
So the sources suggest that understanding clearly what love is not is maybe a critical starting point.
It seems so. The depth and perfume of love, as he described it, requires a mind free from the burden of sorrow, free from the demands of pleasure,
A mind with that immense space.
unburdened by the heavy contents that thought creates and clings to. Yeah.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, pulling these threads from the sources on Krishnamurti's perspectives.
We have.
We've looked at his challenge to our thought-driven reality, his radical rejection of any external authority, his view on that interconnected movement of fear, pleasure, pain,
His challenging stance on instantaneous change versus gradual effort.
and his emphasis on unbiased, intense observation as the path, alongside his insights into beauty, love, and space.
He consistently challenges us, doesn't he? To look directly at what is within ourselves without escaping into comfortable beliefs or external guidance or that endless pursuit of pleasure.
Yeah, his insights really highlight the subtle, intricate, often unseen ways that thought, desire, pleasure, and suffering are just fundamentally intertwined in our daily experience.
And maybe the most potent challenging idea he presents is that profound transformation, liberation. It isn't something to be achieved through strenuous effort or self-control.
Or by accumulating more spiritual knowledge or beliefs about yourself.
Right. It comes from a completely different kind of attention, an intense, unbiased, choiceless observation of the totality of your own being, the mind in action.
Which leaves us with something powerful to really sit with and consider, drawing directly from these sources.
Ponder the idea that pleasure, the very thing we're so often conditioned to seek, isn't just fleeting, but is inherently linked to pain and fear.
And consider the possibility that this constant, thought-driven pursuit of pleasure might be precisely what stands in the way of experiencing something else entirely.
Something like true joy, maybe. True love. Truth itself.
So what does it actually mean to truly live in the present moment, seeing things exactly as they are, without that powerful, thought-driven demand for repetition, without the interference of desire shaped by memory in the past?
And what does know thyself truly signify in this context? Not as a philosophical slogan or another belief to adopt,
but as a continuous, active, unbiased, and maybe even difficult observation of the totality of your own inner landscape.
something to truly explore for yourself.